At Webflow, the decision cycle is often more emotional and creative.
It's actually not great creative that wins, it's great insight that wins.
You can experiment your way to efficiency, but only brand gives you that big leverage.
Insights into the innovations and revolutions of the marketing world. Welcome to the Marketing Scientists Podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Marketing Scientists. Today, we're talking to Josh Grant, who runs growth at Webflow. He's been there for a couple of years. Josh has a wealth of experience in both B2B and B2C, with experiences across WorldPay, FIS, Affirm, and most recently, Webflow. We talk about everything from what's happening in AI to brand versus performance and how to build growth teams and all about incrementality. So this is going to be a fun one. I hope you give it a listen, and let's dive in. Josh, I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. It's been a long time coming. I've been a fan and an admirer from far. We hung out at Inbound last year. I think that's when I first met you. And we had a great conversation about all things. And I thought your experience and what you're doing in market right now as a marketing leader at Webflow would be very relevant for everybody. So excited to dig in. Thanks for joining. Yeah, let's start there.
Let's do it.
Right before we started recording, you said something which is like, hey, the last few weeks and months have been crazy in a positive way, and there's lots of interesting things going on. Break it down for us in terms of what's causing that excitement for you personally, and I'll have a bunch of questions after that.
Yeah, definitely. Also, thank you for having me. It has been a long time coming and very excited to chat today. Like AI is changing everything right now, right? And I've been really just like in the trenches with my growth team on unlocking AI for the team, right? And I use this framework that has been resonating. And how I think about this is like where we can use AI to build internally, right? And really drive efficiency and real growth. How we build with and for AI, that's both from a product perspective and how we think about like how we show up in the outputs of LLMs, et cetera. And then like fundamentally understanding how AI is shifting market dynamics, right? And how we respond to that. And you think about a company like Webflow, where we're in the process of really creating a platform and moving up market and gaining that up market velocity. Just understanding on what that means for enterprises and what that means for like the lower end of the market, where all these alternative tools are really starting to play. It's quite fascinating. So it's definitely made for a interesting few weeks, but really excited with where we're going. The adoption of AI and integration into growth programs has just been really fascinating.
No, I couldn't agree more. We're a very small team compared to Webflow. Obviously, we have one salesperson and one marketer and myself, and we have a bevy of freelancers and agencies who are helping us with stuff. And I think the things that you can do with AI today just were not possible, 5 years ago. So I definitely respect that. You had made a post about how a significant amount of traffic is coming to you now through LLMs. Was that a conscious investment on your side, or did that just happen given that you had good SEO already? I'm curious to kind of get your take on that and what the lessons have been for you all as you dig into that.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think like everyone, right? Like we start to see cannibalization in our direct traffic, and everyone is seeing this right now. And then once ChatGPT introduced direct linking, we started to see influx overflow from ChatGPT directly. So we made that correlation. Obviously, like we're seeing the cannibalization, but we're seeing it recognized via LLM outputs, and start to make conscious effort in, we do have a very strong foundation for SEO in the game right now at Webflow. Like, how do we really adapt to like differences there with AEO and like and how we build for the outputs of LLMs? So I think that our strong foundation with SEO has really given us an advantage to like sprint at optimizing for what we believe to be the right moves, right? To optimize for AEO or AIO, whatever acronym you're using.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. So definitely a big focus areas of ours. And we're seeing that like we're seeing progress in increasing the signups that we're influencing from LLM outputs based off of specific initiatives we're seeing it. And it's really hard to do like a causal analysis around this, which is just the world we're living in right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, thank you for saying that, right? Because there's a lot of people out there who will say, no, here's the exact step-by-step playbook that'll get you to be, featured in LLM output. And I'm like, you really don't know. Like, how do we all know? We're doing our best because algorithms are changing all the time and the models are changing all the time. But, I noticed this 2 weeks ago where the number 3 referral channel for us was
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I was like, we didn't, consciously do anything to make that happen. So some of it is just like, I think these platforms are still figuring it out. And
Yes.
what my hunch is, and everything that I read online is, if you have great Q&A content on your website, that tends to be how these LLMs kind of consume, web content. But I'm curious if there are other things like that you've discovered.
It's a really, really important point right there, right? Is like, traditionally you think about SEO as like showing up everywhere and making sure you're cited in the right sources. And I think like folks tried to translate that into AEO, a world of like, let's make sure that we're getting scraped in all the right areas. But it's actually not that simple, right? It's actually like these LLMs are fundamentally doing like research and deep learning. So you need to teach them, right? You need to like provide that value beyond just, hey, is this going to scrape my site? So that's where like facts pages are super, super interesting. And we're seeing some significant movement of when we intentionally invest in increasing facts pages, right? Just like that correlation and uptick that we see with LM output. And again, like, yeah, these things are for sure subject to change as new models are released and updates to the algorithms. But for now, I think I'd really recommend to go beyond just the scrape, right? Like, how are you feeding this actual intelligence, right? And that's who's going to ultimately win, I believe, at the end of the day.
Cool. You said facts pages, which I think you mean FAQ pages.
That's
but
right.
I'm connecting the dots here. Okay, great.
That is right. That is right.
All right. Awesome. Okay, so we're entering this new world, but honestly, some of the fundamentals are not that different, right? Like, good marketing is good marketing. And you've seen some of the best companies out there. You ran growth at Affirm. You've been at Webflow for a few years. One thing that I like to start with folks who have that broad experience, public companies, high growth sort of private companies, there's a lot of advice out there. So what is one piece of advice that sounds smart, yet might lead teams to the wrong direction? Any things that come to mind for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that like the assumption of let's scale what's working immediately. And what I mean by that is it sounds smart, and often that just creates the scaling channel mechanics and not actual value delivery. So like CAC looks good until a segment saturates or the market shifts. So instead of that, I try to think about why something is fundamentally working, like what's resonating in a message or moment or intent, and then doubling down on that insight across channels. I found to be actually like wildly fruitful. Instead of just, hey, this looks efficient, let's scale the shit out of it. Like, let's actually understand like why, which is quite interesting.
Love that. Love that. And somebody said this to me recently, that it's actually not great creative that wins, it's great insight that wins. So
100%.
it's
Love that.
understanding the why behind why something is working, and then replicating that why in many different ways.
That's precisely right. And if you look at like aggregate data, it can often be very, very misleading. And I think that if you just take that time to like double click and truly understand like the insight around it, right, that's when you can start thinking about scale in a really, really smart way. And that requires also this practice of like being very, very quant and very qual in the ability to understand and being empathetic on things like creative, on things like ad copy, et cetera. It's actually probably the best part of my job, truly.
Yeah. Is there a particular, ritual or habit that you all have developed internally in your teams on that qual side? I feel like not enough teams have that muscle to think about creative in a different way. Like, is there something that you do differently in your teams about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The centralized experimentation roadmap is definitely like our starting point. And then based off of that, right, like we do pretty deep analysis on what experiments we're running, what that means. And embedded in that is trying to find that insight, which is neat, right? And that's kind of like, it's a level deeper than just having this experimentation roadmap where you're just looking at like stat sig and did you hit stat sig or did you not hit stat sig? I really always want to understand the why, because it leads to better outcomes. It leads to more ideas. It leads to more experiments, and it creates this like pretty efficient flywheel of experimentation.
Yeah. Makes sense. Digging in a little bit on your Affirm experience. So when you moved from Affirm to Webflow, were there things that carried over to you from a larger environment? I can't remember if it was a public company already when you were there, to a slightly more sort of smaller company, or was it a complete sort of shift in how you think about, building a growth team?
Yeah. So at Affirm, I joined just pre-IPO, and the interesting part of Affirm is everything was measurable down to the dollar, right? Like that rigor. So understanding payback, understanding incrementality, downstream LTV is priceless, right? Like Affirm was so focused on profitability that this was very critical to how you spend dollars anywhere in marketing, or anywhere across the business, from R&D to marketing. I think what doesn't carry over to Webflow, like it does and it doesn't, is just like the over reliance on immediate conversion. So at Webflow, like the decision cycle is often more emotional and creative. And while growth is math, it's not just math, right? It's really the story. And you need to blend like data precision with brand and experience-led nurturing in a fundamentally different way than you went about Affirm, right? And that's the interesting part about incrementality is sometimes it actually does prohibit you from a velocity perspective because you're so focused with trying to achieve stat sig that you almost like restrict yourself from taking these really bold ideas or these bold leaps. And it's quite fascinating. I just look at like Max, the CEO over at Affirm, right? Like product first founder, wildly successful in doing so, of course. But every dollar that he spends, like he wants to see that return for it in a model, right? And I think about the culture at Webflow, and like while that's true, we're not just burning dollars. We do take these really, really bold swings because intuitively they feel correct. And like I see the output of them, and sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. But we're able to move at a much greater velocity because of this.
Fascinating. And I think some people think about these two as contrary to each other, but I don't think they are, right? To your point, like if you have key insights and you're using those insights to then come up with hypotheses and taking these big swings, you kind of don't have a choice. That's the nature of startup life, right? Because you're not trying to go for like a 5% gain here and 10% gain there. You're trying to get the 50%, 100% gain if possible, and you're not going to get everything right. So have a strategy of how you're going to make those bets. I get it. Not everything is based on just a dollar in, dollar out, financial model.
That's right. And it's an art and a science, right? Like when I step into an organization, I try to put on a CFO hat as a marketing lead because I run big budgets. Like I want that confidence of, hey, CFO, when I go to you and I ask for incremental dollars, there's going to be an incremental return for that. So like that's when like having that thought process of incrementality is quite important and quite helpful. But again, like that at times does prohibit velocity of just like, hey, we have this big area of opportunity, like doubling down on, expanding into our agency audience and this ABM program around it. Let's just go for it. And it is always it's an art and a science. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. And this is also a perfect example of ourselves. We are a couple of orders of magnitude smaller than Webflow. And if we wanted stat sig and incrementality and everything, good luck to us, right? That's just not how it works at smaller scale. And when you have to go for these big swings. So completely aligned with you. Okay, so let's talk about, these big bets that you've taken in your, career in different marketing teams. Was there an experiment or a growth strategist which just was absolutely crushing it for you? And, where did that insight come from? How did you all execute it? How did you measure it? Let's talk about that. And maybe it's something that is going on right now, given all the AI stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think from an overall like go-to-marketing growth strategy perspective, the interesting part of Webflow is historically, like we've focused so much on the down market agency, right? And acquiring these agencies and making them as successful as possible. And typically like they're small freelancers and like lower end of like a small agency.
Yep.
That motion was very, very efficient for us. And we made this strategic pivot to continue to support that motion for sure, but move up market. And with that, like the bulk of what we had to do to grow our upmarket business was really like deeply understanding what our self-serve motion looked like and the segmentation of that self-serve motion and finding these There's really interesting data points in the product to understand propensity on like why a customer would graduate up to a sales led SKU or an enterprise SKU. So with that, became like this framework of, we're moving up market. We want to acquire bigger customers. We don't want to shy away from like the lower end that was historically like very, very fruitful us and very, very efficient for us. So that was kind of the premise of experimentation roadmap on how do you test into that self-serve base, right? How do you find those signals? How do you look at intent? How do you look at certain data points that you can use to fundamentally promote, right, more revenue and revenue expansion within a business? And it's fascinating right now because it feels like we're in a time where everyone who is a PLG business wants to be a sales-led business. Everyone who's a sales-led business wants to be a PLG business. Everyone who's up market wants to move down market and vice versa. And I think that the beauty is if you understand the interconnectivity between these motions, right? Like full stop, that's how you push the business forward.
Very cool. Are there experiments that you can talk about? Like, is it all just basically understanding and mining the data to give you the insight to then sort of unleash, a go-to-market motion that sits on top? Like, is that sort of the key thing that you're focused on?
Yeah, it's like I think about the propensity modeling we did, right? So effectively, actually maybe Affirm is a better example of that, right? So at Affirm, we created what we call the next best action model on the consumer side. And the use case there was we need to drive profitable incremental transactions at scale, right? So what that meant is we had to create like very, very personalized marketing touch points for you versus me because we're going to use Affirm in a very different way. Right. So as we built what was like effectively like a consumer prediction model, we ran that in a way where we'd start to understand a consumer spend habits. We'd have a universal holdout group, right, to ensure that like we were seeing a stat sig lift, and then launch this model that would predict like where they were most likely to spend their next Affirm dollar. Right. And we'd roll this out in a way that was truly experiment, learn, and scale, and then use that input to further feed the model to predict a consumer transaction. And the cool part is we got this to a point where we were predicting both where they were likely to spend with like 85% confidence, which was really wild, and what marketing touch point was most likely to influence a conversion. So like quite literally, you or myself could have been in the same marketing campaign, but it was really an engine, right? Like you're getting in-app notifications on, spending dollars at Peloton, right? Where I'm getting emails to spend dollars at Amazon. And it was fundamentally different based off of what we predicted about you. And with that, we saw that drive just a crazy stat sig increase in consumer transactions and profitable consumer transactions. So it became this true engine that we built. And the cool part there is that's like the best example of deep integration with a data science team and a growth team. And if you think about Affirm just as a business, right? Affirm, more than the uniqueness of their actual product offering, is their ability to do exceptional underwriting. They do all their own underwriting internally. With that becomes or gives you access to some of the best data scientists I've ever worked with, and like start with to steal some of those resources and bake them into growth programs and growth experiments, and just like the fundamental DNA of a growth team was a launch pad to how successful we were.
That makes a lot of sense. And it kind of makes me think that was not that dissimilar from how Meta or Google or LinkedIn probably think about, the next ad to be displayed to you. Right? It's the same sort of underlying methodology. And I was reading a paper recently on how Meta's new model, it's called Andromeda, I think, is, making it better and better. And they've taken this entire process of Pranav on Meta, and there are hundreds of advertisers who are trying to get to Pranav, and what is the best model to put the right ad in front of you, and they break it down really nicely. Very interesting. Okay. Now let's talk about, you've used the word incrementality and incremental returns, and obviously you all did a lot of that at Affirm. You talked about it. How do you think that translates to B2B or Webflow or other sort of PLG, SaaS, B2B type of products? Do you think that that's applicable in your, like, I am biased. Maybe I'm like leading the witness here, but do you think it works? Are you all on that journey yourselves? Like, how do you think about that whole world?
Yeah. fundamentally it's how I lead and I grow teams is with that incrementality lens. And double clicking on that, right, is if I start at the premise of I want my CFO to have confidence in the dollars that I'm spending, right? Like let's have that be our premise,
Yeah.
and I build everything off of that. So like while I talk about the balance of incrementality and like the ability to take like big bold bets and how that can sometimes be in conflict, but really not. At the same time, like we do need to have rigor around measurement, around outcomes, around like what are we actually driving from an incremental revenue perspective, and that changes how I go about setting my budget. That changes how I go about hiring. Changes how I go about like budget distribution across channels or campaigns. So it definitely works for being or for B2B. I think the nuance is sometimes you just don't have the sheer data in a B2B business that you'd have on a consumer business. So hitting stat sig can take quite a bit of time or not at all. And that becomes an exercise of, when do you use directional data versus actually achieving stat sig to make a decision? And I think in a B2B environment where just like quantity of data is often lesser so than a consumer world, you need to get really good at understanding like when to make decisions based off of incrementality or when to make decisions based off of just directional data. And especially in startups and B2B startups, I think like leaning into directional data and having confidence in failing quickly and rebuilding is one of the superpowers of a good B2B marketer.
I love that. And I think I completely agree with you. You said something about sort of how you build, hiring plans and org structures off of this, way of thinking. Let's dig into that a little bit. So if you had to offer advice to a first-time VP of growth or a first-time VP of marketing, maybe entering a Series B, Series C startup, maybe
Yep.
even beyond that, and, they're setting up their org structure, what would you recommend the first, few hires to be, or how to think about sort of what an ideal structure for a growth team might look like?
Yeah, definitely. Let me start with my premise. So as I think about like the mental model I use to build a growth team, I really want to build a growth team where data drives strategy, right? When you get to execution, you're only executing on what you believe is the highest projected impact to the business. You do analysis and optimization, and that further feeds just optimizing existing or net new based off of what that data is telling you. So it becomes this like really efficient flywheel. And to do that, you need a growth marketer who understands channel tactics and messaging. So typically on like the performance side, on the paid side, et cetera. A lifecycle marketer, as you think about fundamentals of building nurture programs and lifecycle programs and expansion. And then someone who's really strong in marketing ops, marketing analytics. And like with those principles, you have the acquisition motion covered, you have the expansion motion covered, and you have that ability to do both execution work and that analysis and optimization work that just further feeds strategy. So that's like the mental model that I use when I think about building a team, whether that's inherited or from the ground up. It's been actually like a largely successful framework that I've used both at Affirm and Webflow, and then probably at close to 24 orgs I worked with just through advisory work as well.
Makes a lot of sense. Very simple, and I like that, right? There's acquisition, there's expansion, there's
Right.
analytics and strategy to feed everything else.
Right. That's also the thing about growth, right? It is oftentimes folks think about growth and growth teams as just acquisition, right? Just fill the top of funnel. But like if you don't fundamentally solve for the entire life cycle, right? From activation to monetization through to retention, then I can spend dollars all day long at the top of the funnel and I'm really just burning them if I'm not optimizing full funnel. So while that is quite simple, there's definitely like intersections with product teams as well and making sure there's tight cohesion there. Because that integration is where it becomes incredibly powerful. And even going back to my Affirm days, we made a very strategic decision to actually collapse product growth and growth marketing, put them under a centralized growth team for that very reason. And it was like truly highly, highly, highly efficient. And we ensured that everything we were doing to fill the top of the funnel was consistent with what we were doing to optimize for the entire funnel, right? Being like post sign up, right? Post activation, these traditional like product surface areas or areas of focus.
I love that. I was having a discussion with another, I think, Series B startup that's doing really well in the video and AI space, and they've just done the same thing. They've taken product growth and growth marketing and kind of combine those two into one leader at the executive level. And the thing that I find, hard about lots of B2B organizations is when you ask a marketing team or growth leader, hey, what are you held accountable to? They will say, revenue.
Right.
But when you ask them, okay, do you have your hands on the product? They'll say no. And right. And so how can you be held accountable to revenue if the biggest part of that revenue flywheel, which is product, is not something you can influence, or you don't have a good relationship cross-functionally? So I think having that full view of the funnel becomes really important. And I'm a big believer in the whole 4Ps thing. It's dated, but I think it's still very relevant. That product, pricing, packaging, placement, and promotion all have to be part of your marketing strategy. So do you think about it the same way? Do you feel like we've been able to achieve that in B2B? Like I feel like most organizations don't, and I know I'm rambling, but I'm curious to hear your take.
Yeah, I have like an identity crisis at this point of my career where folks ask me like externally, like, what do you do for work? I'm like, well, I'm in marketing, but I'm also in like product growth, because I think about my career in growth teams as like the intersection of that, right? And especially in orgs where like there's not that centralization of growth, which are most orgs, you really need to like use marketing's data and marketing's performance to show where you're bottlenecked by product, and then you can actually draw a lot of influence off of like where you need product support. So these are things like bringing heat maps or drop off data or like conversion friction or even like qual stuff like customer quotes. And then I lean hard into these, right? In like doing so, I'm able to, I might not have like all the levers that I need to pull to unlock all areas of the funnel, but we have hardcore data points around where we're seeing friction, where we're seeing drop off, where we're seeing just like funnel health, and then use that to influence broader orgs. And with that, like you will naturally see a tighter cohesion of marketing and product teams if you go about it this way.
So, very tactical question for you. What has been like? Is there what's the engagement model between marketing and product today at Webflow, and what makes it work really well, or what are the challenges that you all have when working together? Because it is a complicated problem. Not to minimize the challenge and the importance of that relationship.
Yeah, if you think about Webflow, that is still the bulk of our revenue comes from our self-serve business. That is so incredibly cross-functional. So we actually created this self-serve crew, right? Which is what we call it internally. And that's comprised of myself, my head of growth marketing, our head of product growth, and actually someone in strategic finance as well, to make sure that finance is brought along on the ride with us. In that kind of like small tagger team or powerhouse of a crew represents all areas of our PLG business, of our self-serve business, right? So acquisition with my head of growth marketing, expansion with head of product growth, churn and retention, which is kind of owned by all of us. And then we have the finance lens on what are we spending, right? What are we pacing towards? Like that real financial lens to it. And with that, we're able to tackle the self-serve business in a way that, yes, I am, singly accountable for incremental ARR for our self-serve business, but I use these teams, right, that have access to all the levers in a way where we can just all work and move together in one direction. And that's been just wildly successful here. And the team's really great. And it's brought just like a lot of cohesion between teams as well, and intersections between teams just moving in that single direction.
That's awesome. So does that make it so that you have GM responsibility almost for that business? Is that how it feels, or is it a little bit more cross-functional than that?
Yeah, it's a good question. In the self-serve business, for sure. So as I think about like my growth function across Webflow, it's actually quite diverse. And Webflow is a pretty wildly complex business the deeper you get into it, just with multiple go-to-market motions, with interconnectivity between those go-to-market motions, with like such a diversity in segments that we acquire. So I think about how I structured my growth team at Webflow, and part of that is being like GM of our self-serve business and owning all incremental revenue around that.
Right.
But also owning demand gen, right, which supports a huge portion of our sales-led business. Also owning lifecycle marketing, right, which supports both sides of the business. Marketing analytics supports both sides of the business. So it is still that framework of like data with marketing analytics will drive self-serve and sales-led strategies. We'll only execute on things that we believe are highest projected impact to the business.
Yeah.
Right. Marketing analytics will continue to do that analysis, and then we just make those consistent optimizations. So it's that same fundamental framework, just at scale, kind of across the entire business.
Awesome. This was great. I have a couple of questions before we go to the speed round here, rapid
For
fire.
sure.
One is there a contrary opinion that you have, something that you believe deeply about growth and marketing that people in our sort of circles might push back on? Is there something like that comes to mind?
Yeah, this is going to be a hot take, but I believe that brand is actually the ultimate growth multiplier. You can experiment your way to efficiency, but only brand gives you that big leverage. It's interesting. If you asked me that question 5 years ago, and if I listened to myself answer, I'd be like, "There's no way." But it really is true, right? Like when your message hits before the click, performance improves across every channel, right? And I look at companies like Ramp or like Brex or these companies that are like truly in hyper growth phase that have quite efficient growth machines and growth engines. And you look at where they're spending dollars or where they're reallocating dollars, and you're seeing more and more go to like more traditional marketing
Mm,
channels,
mm.
like Ramp buying a Super Bowl commercial 5 years ago. There's 3 years ago, right? A late stage is not going to spend money there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how like everything goes back to what it once was, and I feel like we have that shift in marketing as well. So I think AI is kind of leveling the playing field for everyone right now, and I think growth teams have access to the same playbooks, but who's going to stand out in the future world is truly who's as creative as possible and who tells that very, very clear message of value with the most creativity as possible. So it is quite fascinating, just like the evolution. And it makes it interesting as a growth leader who, again, owns a lot of budget that I'm responsible for, like dollars in, dollars out modeling and making those decisions on, do I put them here or do I actually throw them over to the brand side and put on that shareholder hat, knowing that, this is fundamentally what we have to do to scale the business.
Yeah. No, I think that's I don't know if this is a contrary opinion anymore, Josh. I feel like many people are coming around to this idea that brand is the ultimate multiplier. I liked how you framed it. And I think people are realizing that and this is another CMO that I admire, Vineet from Chime, who says this CAC Valley of Death. Have you heard of this concept?
I have.
And he talks about it, and I think he'll be on our podcast sometime soon to talk about this as well. Is basically just like everyone's just trying to get more and more efficient with CAC, but you get so efficient that you're never able to come out of that on the other side in terms of growth. And brand is that sort of growth multiplier that you have to think about. So, and at the same time, you're thinking about brand, you're thinking about AI. I mean, I have to imagine that it's a marketer's dream age right now to be able to do these crazy things that you now have more than anything, you have the permission to do it now.
That's right.
Right?
That's precisely right. And really, like, we should be thinking about like chief marketing operator. Like you're in your own destiny. Like you can build things hardcore, and we have all these AI tools where, like, you are in control. And like if you want to vibe market something, it's actually quite easy, and you don't need end resources, and you can use like the Gumloops of the world or the Lindy's of the world, and like really powerful workflow automation tools to build something that literally, 12 months ago would have taken you, potentially a quarter or two overnight. And it's really, really, really powerful. So if you think about how AI is fundamentally changing market dynamics and how you build, on top of that conversation we just had around like brand versus demand or brand versus performance, it's a wildly complex but exciting time in the industry.
Yeah.
It's
I
yeah,
couldn't
I'm
agree more.
having a blast.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions to bring this to a close. First one,
Let's do it.
what is your favorite AI tool right now?
Oh man, I'm so pro Gumloop. So I just name dropped them, but Gumloop is a workflow automation tool that is just incredible. It's so easy to use, and the use case is like I quite literally indefinite. So as an example, like Reddit is obviously like such a great community play. Like you want to deeply understand like what your customers are talking about on Reddit. So like quite literally a few weeks ago, overnight, built this Reddit scraper where I was looking at Webflow subreddit. I was scraping their subreddit because they have like a node that you can scrape subreddits super easily. Summarizing all of that and setting it up on a report so I understand exactly what our customers are talking about and pain points, and that influences growth strategy or product strategy or P&P strategy. And I can build these things in like minutes. It's quite interesting. I also just I
Go for
posted
it.
about it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I posted about it on LinkedIn recently, but I started to listen to this like Andrew Huberman podcast where his guest was talking about been big in the gym lately, been trying to like up my lifting and up my PRs.
Nice.
And his guest was talking about how you lose fat and gain muscle concurrent, which is quite difficult, right? And I started to listen to it, and it was like a 2.5 hour episode, and I'm like, I just don't have the time. So I set up a gum loop where I effectively took that podcast, I got the transcript, I pulled my macro data that I track in Lose It, which is just an app.
Sure.
And I was like, take this transcript, look at what I'm fundamentally doing, and take the data points around like where I am from a nutritional perspective. I manually typed in just like where I'm at from a weight lifting perspective and just like PRs around it. And I was like, give me recommendations based off of the contents of this transcript. In like 4 minutes of building that, I was able to have like really actionable 3 to 5 steps to implement into my life versus spending like 2.5 hours listening to that podcast, which I don't have because of this crazy that I'm living in right now, and actually like implement it into my life, right? And I think when I think about AI, just optimizing for personal life to free up some of that time, and then like how you integrate into the org, into growth, into just businesses is it's a wild time.
That's awesome. Big fan of lifting and trying to get back in shape myself as well. So I'm gonna hit you up for those notes and that episode.
Amazing.
Um,
Amazing.
I thought this was going to be rapid fire, but I love that answer. So that's great. Uh, okay. Well, another one. What's a personal habit or ritual or obsession that makes you better at work?
Yeah, it's a good one. This is an interesting one that I do. It's kind of quirky. So I catalog ads that I almost clicked on, but I did not click on, and then reverse engineer why I did not click on it. And it helps me sharpen like, yeah, it helps me sharpen like what builds trust and then what fundamentally doesn't build trust. So when I'm seeing these ads pop up, even when I'm like scrolling just like on personal social media platforms and I'm about to click, I have that, intentional decision where I'm like, I don't actually click, and why don't I click? And I screenshot it and I email it to myself and I put it in a catalog that I then reference as I'm actually building.
Well, that's great. That's like a anti. What do you call those? It's not a scrapbook. Okay, I'm totally blanking on. It'll come to me. But this is your anti-portfolio. Oh,
Precisely.
that's great. That's decisive. I'm going to start doing that. Awesome. Josh, this was fantastic. Thank you again for spending all this time with us. Are you hiring? I'm assuming you're hiring. You have lots of roles, like Webflow's growing. Yeah, tell us about that.
I am hiring. I continue to hire. I want to create the best growth function as possible. So please review our careers page. We're up to some really, really interesting stuff here at Webflow and really adopting this AI narrative in everything we do, right? And this is across the org at this point. And really doubling down on fundamentally how we make it easier for marketers to build websites with greater velocity, right? Native analytics tools, right? Native personalization tools, native experimentation tools. And no longer do you need to have this wild MarTech stack of like WordPress and Optimizely, but centralized into single platform is effectively what Webflow is solving for marketers right now. So the core audience is me in a lot of ways, which makes me incredibly passionate about the organization, about where we're going, about having influence on the product roadmap and the go-to-market roadmap. So cool things happening here at Webflow for sure.
Amazing. Go check out Webflow. And if you haven't yet followed Josh on LinkedIn, go give him a follow. And yeah, Josh, we'll do this again in a few months. This was fantastic. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Pranav. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that was Josh Grant. Go check out Webflow. Go check out Josh on LinkedIn. And stay tuned for another great episode next week.